my name is Tom Brown, your host for today's Green TV. Thanks for watching. There is no Social Security crisis. The Bush administration has cooked up a phony crisis. Its goal is to gut Social Security and shift an even greater share of the nation's wealth away from the middle class to the administration's already wealthy and powerful supporters. Giving you the facts on this trumped-up crisis is so important that I will stop now so we can start the show. Here is Dean Baker, widely acknowledged and quoted expert on Social Security, who will explain why the crisis is phony to its core and tell us what steps should be taken to keep Social Security strong and available for all Americans. Please stay with us for Part 3 of Social Security, the Phony Crisis.
I have two real quick questions. What do you see as the solution to the Medicare, the whole medical system? And what do you think is going to be the outcome of this Social Security debate that's going on?
Good question. I'll tell you, Medicare, we have to fix our healthcare system. And, you know, I wrote something half in jest about a year ago, only half in jest. We called it Medicare Choice Plus. You might recall the Republican Congress, Gingrich, when he was running the show about 10 years ago, came up with Medicare Plus Choice. We're going to give people the option to go into HMOs, and this is going to be really great. Turned out it raised costs. It didn't lower them, it made it more expensive. Medicare Choice Plus, what that does is gives everyone a voucher, and it allows them to buy into any healthcare system that has a longer life expectancy than the U.S. Okay, now the average cost of the other healthcare systems is less than half as much as the U.S., so what it does, the voucher splits the difference. Okay, so the government saves money, and then you save money because you can go buy into Denmark's system or Canada's system or France's system, and you get to pocket the difference. Okay, now I say it's half in jest because it's a real crazy idea. On the other hand, it's even more crazy to just imagine we're never going to do anything and just let our health costs keep rising. Okay, what do we have to do? You have healthcare systems that work in Canada, across Europe. You can find complaints. They always bring the person, this person waited 6 years for a heart transplant. You know, I can find something like that here too, by the way. But, you know, but that's what they'll show you. And yeah, it's not going to, you know, there's problems with every healthcare system, but we have the data. These healthcare systems work better than ours by any standard measure, and they cost less than half as much. I think we have to try and emulate, you know, these other systems. Canada's got a good system. Some of the other European countries have good systems. I mean, some are better, some are worse. They're all better than ours in the sense that they have better outcomes and cost a lot less. You can't get anyone to have that conversation in Congress right now because they still remember back in 1994, you know, when Hillary Clinton came out with her health care plan and got totally shot down, and they're still scared to talk about it ever since. So, but that's what it'll take, and that means overcoming some very powerful interest groups. You know, the health insurance industry, which will probably go out of business with that. Is the whole point. The health insurance industry's income, just like the financial industry's income, is waste. Okay, if you could do the system without it, then why wouldn't you want to do it? Okay, so they get hit. The drug industry is going to take a real big hit because they're making out like bandits, and with the reformed healthcare system, they almost certainly have much, much smaller income. And you might see some high-end people, you might see some doctors, particularly some of the specialists, the real high earners, probably take a hit. So these are very, very powerful groups, and they don't want that talked about. So you have to talk about fixing the healthcare system. The second question, where do I see it going? I've been struck by what's happened, the direction of the debate, because when President Bush announced this 2 days after the election, I didn't take for granted at all that there'd be this sort of solid opposition among the Democrats. There were a lot of Democrats that you could have imagined jumping on board, you know, working out some compromise, saying, you know, well, maybe we don't want it wholesale, we want something like that. I was really struck by that. So the Democrats have been nearly solid in opposition. The unions have been very strong in opposition, which again I didn't take for granted. I didn't think they'd support it, but you know they have other things to worry about, so I didn't know that they would make it front and center. They've made it a very big issue. They've taken a very active role in going after Schwab and others, have been fighting this proposal. Also, AARP has been hugely important. A lot of you might remember that AARP on the prescription drug benefit, they ended up endorsing President Bush's plan. It was hugely important getting it through. Almost certainly would not have gone through without their support. They've been very strongly opposed to this plan and have spent a lot of money trying to defeat it. So I've been struck by how strong the opposition has been. What I think are two scenarios. One is that there's a deal cut where you find some people like Lieberman, for example, cutting a deal with, at least the visible figures, presumably the administration will be in on it, but the visible figures would be people like McCain, that are considered the more moderate Republicans, that might involve some private accounts that at least initially don't appear to be carved out of Social Security, but probably are in fact. So that way, I could design systems that don't look like they're cutting out of Social Security, but in fact are. But this would allow them to say it doesn't come out of Social Security, even though that's fully the intention of the design. So I can imagine that being one scenario, but I think that's the less likely scenario. I think the more likely scenario is that nothing happens, because the sides are sufficiently far apart. And, at the end of the day, everyone in this debate knows you really don't have to do anything. So as much as, President Bush might be out there saying, oh, it's getting worse by the day, and if we don't do anything, he knows, or I don't know if he knows, but his advisors certainly know that you don't have to do anything. So my best guess is, if I had to place probabilities, I think scenario one is probably about 20 or 30%. The other scenario is 70, 80% probability that nothing happens at the end of the day.
What would you say to those cynics who think that all this is just a detraction from the war in Iraq?
It's an interesting issue. It's been striking how it has dominated the news, and one of the things that I've been struck by, you're always trying to put yourself in their shoes. If you're President Bush and you see, okay, you're not getting the response you hope for, you're getting beaten up. You have to have these controlled crowds, and when members of Congress go out and make their case, they're scared because people heckle them or they ask tough questions and they're protesting and they don't like that. And so why does he keep pressing it? Does he really think it's going to turn around? And it's very hard to see why he would think that, because all the polls that come in show that the more people hear about it, the more they don't like it. So then you're sort of saying, well, maybe he has some other motive, and that could well be. So the war certainly has fallen to the background. It's not the lead story in the news. It's buried in the insides of the paper for the people who are reading through the papers. I wouldn't rule it out. I'm sort of looking at, is there something else we're missing? It might be the war, it might be something else. Because at this point, it is hard to see how he thinks that it will turn around to his benefit. Not to say it's impossible. This guy, he says, don't misunderestimate me, and, good advice.
You had a chart up there earlier about the Social Security Trust Fund as being U.S. bonds. Now, the way I understand it is, by law, the U.S. government has to be good on those bonds.
Yeah.
However, there is no law that guarantees Social Security benefits. Is that correct?
They could change the benefit structure, that's right.
But there's no obligation by law.
No, by law there is. They would have to change the law. They would have to change the law. Congress could vote to change the law.
You're saying there is a law that
Well,
says that
the
Social Security
benefits are
benefits
set-
must be paid?
The benefits are in law. Congress could go out and change the law. But unless they change the law, then benefits must be paid.
Well, the way I understand it, the bonds are guaranteed by law to be paid,
That's right.
but there's not a guarantee by law
Yeah.
to pay out Social Security benefits. Because if there comes a time in the future where there's a crisis and they have to decide whether to pay out the bonds or pay out benefits, are they just going to pay out the bonds and not benefits?
Well, let me make it, this may be what you're getting at. Under the law, Social Security has to be paid. Okay, as long as there's money in the accounts, and in fact, this is exactly how much would be paid if the trustees are exactly right. Okay, so they would pay off the bonds. Now, they could change the law tomorrow. Now, the distinction between Social Security and, let's say you or I hold a government bond. Okay, Congress, it would require constitutional action for them to default on the debt. At least that's my understanding. I'm not a lawyer. But they would have to, I believe they would actually have to change the Constitution if they're just to default on the government debt. Okay, that would be more difficult for them to do than changing Social Security. But they would still have to, you have a legal obligation under the law now to pay Social Security. Congress could change that. You know, just like they could change the taxes. They could double your tax rate, they could cut it in half. You know, so our taxes, you know, you think you're having a take-home pay of $40,000 a year, Congress would go, no, guess what? You only have a take-home pay of $10,000 a year because we just raised your taxes, you know, to 90%.
Well, they might say that because they'll say, because we have an obligation to pay off bonds, which are, a lot of our bonds are owned by foreign governments.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I don't think they're gonna raise taxes to 90%, but.
yeah, I know, but I mean, they might say, sorry, U.S. citizen, we can't make good on your Social Security benefit payout because we have to pay out on the U.S. bonds.
Well, they would
a
have to
foreign
change,
government.
they would have to change the law to do that. They can change the laws, but that would mean you'd have to have members of Congress who say, okay, you know, we don't care that we have these Social Security obligations, we have other things, we're gonna, you know, default on the bonds. They could do that. I mean, you know, those people then have to go to their constituents and get reelected, and maybe they would, I don't know. You know, I mean, my bet is that they won't do it, and I can tell you for absolute certainty, you won't get a single member of Congress today who'll stand up and say he wants to do that, he or she wants to do that. But anything could happen, but it would require them changing the law.
It's been said that one way to help solve the Social Security problem would be to take the Social Security off budget. Exactly what is that? How would it work?
That's a good question. I'll beat up on you now as a reporter. Social Security actually is already off budget. And the issue is, whenever the budget deficit is reported, it's standard practice to add in the Social Security surplus. So, you know, we borrow this money, currently about $80 billion a year from Social Security, and then we report the deficit as though we weren't borrowing it. Now, officially, Social Security is already off budget, and every single budget document I know of has right there in front of everyone, it has what's called the on-budget deficit, which excludes the Social Security surplus. And what I always say, people say that politicians are hiding the deficit. They're using it. So why don't you just report the on-budget deficit? It's right there. Every single document has it. And you know, I don't understand that. If reporters think that that's the more relevant number, then why don't they just report it? It's not, you know, George W. Bush doesn't decide which deficit number gets reported in the Washington Post. You know, the Washington Post decides it. So if that's the important number, I'm an economist, I use both numbers. I don't feel a need to hide it, you know, for different purposes. One number's better, the other, you know, I'm not trying to hide anything. I use both numbers, and depending on what I'm trying to do, I'll, you know, use the number that's appropriate to it. But, you know, for many purposes, it would be more appropriate to print the on-budget deficit. And, you know, the politicians may not want that out there, but every paper in the country, as far as I know, is perfectly free to do that. And, you know, it doesn't even require doing the arithmetic. It's literally right there. So I don't know what you could do when it hasn't already been done. I mean, if that's the important number, that's what should be reported.
Okay.
I think Chile was the first country to start with a personal account, but now there are 20 countries in the world, including some in Europe. Is getting this system popular now, that more and more?
It's a mixed story. It's probably been more than 20. Almost every country in Latin America, Brazil's the big exception, but almost every country in Latin America has adopted private accounts. A lot of countries in Eastern Europe, the Czech Republic, Poland, I think the Slovak Republic, a number of countries in Eastern Europe have. Kazakhstan did, you know, the former Soviet republics. So it's a lot of countries around the world. The response, the outcomes have been very, very mixed. One of the reasons why so many countries have adopted is the World Bank has been very aggressive in promoting it. So the World Bank has been willing to finance, been willing to make loans and help support countries that shift to a privatized system. And they actually just reviewed their systems in Latin America, and they came up with a very mixed assessment, because what they said was, one, they have very high administrative expenses. We were talking about Chile. Chile is probably the best example. Most of the others are much worse. Secondly, they don't do what they're supposed to do in terms of keeping people out of poverty. You still have, you know, a lot of people have inadequate benefits in retirement. A third point, this actually a Chilean system's a good example here. The Chilean system actually has a minimum benefit that, you know, you keep your account, you have the option to turn in your account if you don't think it's made enough money and get this guaranteed minimum benefit. In Chile, somewhere around 30 or 40% of the workers actually do that. So they're in effect getting a defined benefit, traditional defined benefit, even in the middle of having a defined contribution plan. The last thing is people don't participate. In Chile, again, being probably the best of these, only about half the workforce participates. If you look in countries like Peru, Bolivia, it's around 20%. So the World Bank's assessment was it was good that they reformed their old systems, because there were lots of problems with their old systems, but they say that these aren't working very well, and they actually say these should be seen as a transition, that, you know, that they would like to see them actually get to something like the US system, where you have, you know, a well-working defined benefit system, and then on top of that, a voluntary system of voluntary pensions. So, you know, by that assessment, which I should point out, it's not a universal view of the World Bank at all, but by that assessment, they saw this as a transition, and that we should actually be looking to move towards something like the US, what the US has today.
I heard the news today that the new president of the World Bank will be Mr. Wolfowitz, the one pretty much involved in the Iraq.
Yeah.
How is it going to affect all this?
Well, it's hard to say. My guess is that Mr. Wolfowitz will probably be a strong proponent of the system of accounts. The other side of it is that, you know, the World Bank has a mixed record. It doesn't always have that much credibility in a lot of countries. And with Mr. Wolfowitz at the head of it, they might have less credibility. So there might, so even though he might be aggressively pushing for these accounts, he might find less response in the developing world.
I tend to agree that the rhetoric about the Social Security crisis is overblown. Oftentimes in economic discussion, the rhetoric is overblown. But on the other hand, I think on the other side, the predictions of dire consequences of Bush's plan are also overblown. It wouldn't do a lot of good, but it probably wouldn't do a lot of harm either. For one thing, it is voluntary, it is partial. And suppose that it should come to pass that somehow Bush got it through. Then you could simply direct your efforts to advising people not to participate in privatization. And it doesn't seem to me that would be a catastrophe.
Well, there's a few things. I mean, first off, just to be clear, we don't have a full plan. The closest thing we had to a full plan was the plan that his commission produced, and he actually modeled in the economic report of the president last year, so it was plan 2 from his commission. And they had large cuts, and those cuts weren't voluntary. Those would apply to everyone. But secondly, his plan puts in place a structure that looks like it's intended to undermine the system, because, you know, I was mentioning it's a little complex in its layout, and I think the fact that it's complex in its layout points to the intention. What it does is I take, you know, 4% of my wages, you know, if I choose to do it, I take 4% of my wages and put it into these accounts, okay? And then when I retire, they take back, in effect, they've loaned me the money. They treat it like they've lent me the money. And they take back that loan, but they don't take it out of the account, they take it out of my guaranteed benefit. Okay, now that's very strange for a lot of different reasons, but one reason that very much concerns me is, let's say I'm earning $25,000 a year, I put $1,000 a year into my account. When I retire, let's say that money gives me a benefit of, you know, $700, $800 a month, something like that. Well, they're going to take that money out of my defined benefit. So what I'm having my defined benefit is very little. We actually did the calculations for a typical worker. That's going to be almost zero before too long. So you're going to have a lot of people saying, well, I put 4% into my account, and that gave me, you know, $800, whatever it might be a month. My boss is putting in 6.2% for me. On top of that, I'm putting in 2.2%. Now, that also goes for disability and survivors, but people may not be clear on that. And what do I get from that? Well, $100, $200. Why should I contribute to that? Now, if President Bush were honest in this and just said, okay, we'll let you put in the accounts, and then we're going to take back the money we lent you, why not just take it right out of the account? That'd be real simple. But instead, he constructs this structure that seems designed to make the accounts look good and make the defined benefit system look bad. So it's very hard for me to imagine that you put this structure in place and 20, 30, 40 years out, you would still have people paying taxes for a system where they see themselves getting almost nothing back. So it looks to me like he's trying to set up a structure that is intended to destroy the system. Now, there's other complexities that you know, I could get into, probably bore everyone, but there's other complexities about this that, again, it's very hard to understand why he would set it up this way unless the purpose were to destroy the system. There's another question, yeah.
You had a chart a while back, if you could get back to it, it was showing the increases in taxes over the decades.
Yeah.
Okay, now, I want you to explain that chart to me, because currently Social Security tax is 6.2% of your income, correct?
Yeah, 6.2 on both the worker and the employer,
Yeah.
so it's a total of 12.4.
Now, is that what that chart is inferring, the worker contribution and the employer contribution? Because if it was just a 6.2, that there ends up more than
Right,
6.2.
it's taking the 12.4.
Okay.
It's a little more complex than that because, I won't get into all the details, but it used to be, for people who are self-employed, they just pay the employee side. That changed in the 80s, so they pay both the employee and employer side, so I factored that into this as well.
One thing the professor said earlier about lifting the cap,
Yeah.
he made a mention that Medicare doesn't have a cap, correct?
Yeah, so I think it's
But that tax is only 1.45% though, too.
on each employer and employee, so 2.9
Yeah,
total.
okay.
Yeah, it's a considerably smaller tax.
Yeah, but I'm all in favor of lifting that cap off because I mean, why should a multimillionaire only pay on 90% of his income?
Yeah,
We
well,
all make less than $90,000, and we're paying on 100% of our income. Whereas a millionaire, he's only paying on his first 90,000 and stops.
yeah.
He should pay on $1 million.
It's a very
He's a
aggressive
millionaire.
tax.
He's paying about 1% on his income, while we're paying 6.2% on our income.
Yeah.
It's a farce.
No, it's a very aggressive tax.
One more question. 1983, you mentioned that a few times as a year of problems. Can we delve more deeply into that to consider just how strong that crisis was, how fast it was solved, more the numbers also?
Well, at that point, the program literally, Social Security literally ran out of money in somewhere in '82. I forget which month it was. They had to borrow money from the disability fund, and I think they also borrowed from the Medicare fund. And in response to that, Reagan originally came up with a proposal that involved benefit cuts. There was a huge outcry against it. He backed away from it. And then he came up with this bipartisan commission where he appointed, if I remember right, he appointed 5 people. I think the House appointed 5 people and the Senate appointed 5 people. And it was roughly split Democrat and Republican. And they sat down and met. They came up with their plan somewhere in I think it was March of '83. And that came up with these tax increases. They also raised the retirement age. So they, most people still aren't aware of this, but the retirement age, the normal retirement age is rising from 65 to 67. Most people actually start collecting benefits at age 62, but you get reduced benefits. So the year that you would get the normal benefit had been 65. Beginning in 2002, they began raising that, and it'll hit 67 as of 2022 for people who turned 62 in that year. So they've raised the retirement age, they phased that in. That was again a result of the Greenspan Commission's recommendations. There's also a minor benefit cut. They delayed a cost of living increase for like 6 months or something. So there was a minor cut, immediate cut in benefits in addition to that. But that was, by any measure, a far more immediate crisis or shortfall, say you're literally out of money, than what we're looking at today. And, it's hard, there's other factors, so it's hard to make an exact comparison because we weren't seeing this surge in retirements as we will be seeing, come, a few years out. So it's a little different trajectory, so we can't compare exactly. But, you might say to get where we were in 1983, maybe we'd be talking about somewhere in the 2030s by the trustees' projections and the 2040s by the CBO projections. So we have a long way to go until we're, anywhere near, where we were in '83.
Why are we doing the real average, real compensation increases? Why don't we have a constant, just real compensation? Just seems to me that if we kept the real compensation this flat line, that would be an efficient. See how it increases there? I was wondering if you could just say, keep it at a certain pace, keep it at the 100, then there would be no problem at all, and you'd actually still have the surpluses. And why do we, well, the major question is, why do we have to have the increase of real hourly compensation?
Okay, just to be clear what this is people's wages. So this is, so I'm saying, this is what's projected at least to happen with people's wages. And wages have in general risen through time, at least on average, and we're projecting they'll continue to increase through time. So this is talking about people's wage income. And
I think it was another chart that you had about real compensation.
well, compensation is wages and benefits.
Okay.
So this is wages and, healthcare, retirement benefits. So this is, all your compensation after deducting Social Security taxes.
Got it.
Any more questions? Okay, well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.